Hello and welcome to the Wizard and the Priestess. Wizard here with you once again while Nuala is in recovery mode. Today we're going to talk about getting by through hardships. Now, we've all been through something at some point in time, and a lot of people don't really move through it. They usually suppress it, ignore it, which ultimately leads to a build-up of pressure within the system. That energy has to go somewhere. Therefore, there's so much energy going through the circuit, we often blow the fuse, and that blowing the fuse is what we call pain or disease or dysfunction. Now, as we've all had hardships, we've all been given, I guess, lots of advice from lots of different angles, lots of different experiences shared. And because I work primarily with people going through some kind of hardship at that given moment, I wanted to share with you today some tips that I ultimately share with people, and I can share from my own hardships and how I got through them. Hopefully they can help you and or someone that you know who might be going through a bit of a thing at the moment. Now, I'm not going to go through all my hardships because that's probably a separate episode. However, I will talk you through a recent-ish one that happened 2 or 3 years ago now. And in the space of, let's say, 2 months, I think, 2-3 months, to give you just the bullet point story. Firstly, opened up a wellness center, which in itself was quite stressful. Opening that with someone and losing individuality within that. Opening, the stress of that, then going to teach, then ending a relationship of 2 and a bit years, coming back home to an empty house, which in and itself is weird enough. But then deciding to kind of renew my life, reset. Thought I'd sell some things and do all that kind of stuff. Out with the old, in with the new type mentality, I guess I was thinking at the time. And I tried to sell an iPhone. Now, I won't go into the details, but I got scammed trying to sell an iPhone and lost a lot of money. When I say a lot of money, I was down to my last, I think, $94 to my name. And I got to a point in life where it was, what the hell happened? How did I not see this coming? What the F am I going to do? And there was probably a good month where I was not in a good place. I wasn't smiling. I wouldn't call myself depressed either. I was just in a state of shock. And the day I found out what was really going on, I was actually in my kitchen and curled over on the floor, dry reaching. It just impacted every single part of me. And through that time, it was a time where I viscerally felt and understood why someone might end it from there. And in that time, I didn't really tell it. Did I tell someone? I think I told 2 people, and not that I meant to. It just sort of came out in conversation. But I really had to put a mask on and be happy and healthy and motivating for everyone else. And that was probably the hardest thing about the whole thing, that I couldn't really share it. Well, not that I couldn't. I felt that I couldn't, which isn't true. So during that time, for me, I never really had a thing about money until kind of that occurred. And it was a very trying period of life, as you can imagine. Now, everyone would look at that differently, but I was able to, at some point down the line, have a bit of compassion for myself and realize that at the time, my heart was in 1,000 pieces, so it's fair to say I wasn't really thinking clearly. I was scammed by someone trying to buy the phone that I was selling with crypto. Had zero idea how the crypto works. And through that time, I was about to train at the gym, where I just felt almost like the spirit fell out of me this particular day. And so I actually laid down on the floor, and as I was laying there, I remember, I think I actually said it out loud. It's like, what the hell am I going to do now? And in that kind of surrendering moment, if you will, I just heard a voice in the silence. And the voice I heard was, "What a story." And from that little, let's call it a little exchange, I call it an exchange by the gods, that from that little exchange, I got the impression that when most people you hear on the radio, see on TV, read in the paper, write books, on podcasts, etc., they've all been through something significant that has altered their very being on some level. And for me, at that point in time, that was it. It was a string of stresses, and that one was just the F this moment type situation. And so from that, I was able to see that this was just my thing. This was just my catalyst, if you will. And I just got an image of telling this story, I guess, to the public one day, and how I got through it and how I built myself back to a position where I felt, to be honest, felt comfortable enough to share it without feeling really small and maybe even crying. So that exchange for me was an incredible moment in my life, and until it's happened, it's hard to resonate with, because you can say, "Oh, well, you should have noticed this and did that, and then they would have said this and said that and blah blah blah." Easy to say, and yeah, in hindsight, absolutely correct. However, when you're in it, it's hard to see out of it, is the point. And sometimes all you need is just to say it out loud. And as I was living alone, I was talking to my plants a lot, and I was too blocked within myself to hear anything coming back. But just to say it out loud and share it just lightened the load just a little bit. And I remember one of my favorite stories about overcoming a hardship was one I heard from Carolyn Miss, who talked about a Navajo Indian who got recruited into the US Army called David Chelathlahe. And he was living on a reservation in Arizona. And then basically David and his cousins spent a great deal of time leaving the reservation and then going into town. They drank a lot, and they thought life is better in the white man's world. And I think he was about 13 years of age when he was an alcoholic. So David and his cousin decided that this was their time. They were going to make it off the reservation, and they did. So they found their way to California, wherein they lied about their ages and signed up for work with I think the Marines, if I remember right. But during this time, David befriends another young man from Germany, and he also begins drawing. Some of his sketches include what are known to become the eventual bunkers that the Japanese were building on the atolls of the I think it was Pacific Ocean. So World War II is eventually declared. The US Army tells David that since they lied about their age within the Merchant Marines, that he had a choice. He can go to jail for a year or enlist in the army. So as a teenager, David enlists in the army. And the army tells David, as he's a Navajo, they're going to drop him behind enemy lines, use him as like an information gatherer, informant, someone who gathers information in their special services. So David, using his native tongue, is to relay his findings to another Navajo in the army, and their language becomes a code that, to my knowledge, the Germans weren't able to crack, let alone decipher. Now, David is dropped behind enemy lines. Ultimately and eventually he's captured and interrogated for the information, but the officers find him useless and direct that he be sent to a death camp and executed as a spy. So imagine, if you will, the scenes you have all invariably seen of the railroad station and the platform filled with lines of prisoners being pushed into boxcars and going into camps. So here's David. He's being pushed and shoved into one of these boxcars. There's a German soldier pushing him and yelling at him. David stops, turns around and looks at the soldier. And it happened to be his friend that he met when he was working in the merchant ships. This friend recognizes David and then ushers him to a different carriage that will send David to the camp. Now, in the barracks, David sees an older man, a fellow prisoner. He saw this guy drop something. Then David goes down to pick it up, and the guard who has just witnessed this little moment asks David, "Are you Christ?" The guard then orders that David's feet to be nailed to the floor, and that David stand there with his arms outstretched for 3 days like Christ did on the cross. Every time David would falter and crumble and fall, the guards would just hoist him back up again. And in the middle of the night, someone would sneak in and cram to his mouth raw maggots, maggot-covered chicken, guts, all these nasty things into his mouth. When the Allies open up to this camp, they find David is essentially a mere shell of what he was, weighing I think about 40 kilos-ish, if I remember right. And in Russian they turn David over to the Russians. David later speaks English, then gives his name, rank and serial number to the Russians, who transfer him back to the US military. So David is sent to a VA hospital in, I think, Michigan. where he spends the next 2 years in a coma. At the end of the 2 years, his legs are encased in metal braces, similar to what I think polio patients had. But David, as a young man, I don't think he was even 21 at this stage, is to be sent to a VA home for the rest of his life. Now, David asks if he can visit his family on the reservation, and the answer, of course, is yes. David literally drags himself onto the reservation. He meets with the elders of the tribe, and they ask to hear his full story. So David tells these elders every horrible thing that he endured, and he's full of anger, rage, hate, and just despite. So the elders confer and tell David to meet them tomorrow at a designated point on the, I can't remember what river it is, but on the river that goes through the reservation. So David agrees, and at the appointed hour he arrives. One of the elders puts a rope around his waist. Others remove the braces around his legs, and they hoist him up into the air, and they throw him into the raging current of the river. And they say, "David, call back your spirit or die. Call back your spirit or die." And in David's case, it was releasing all the rage and the pain that coursed through his entire system. It was moving into a place of release, characterized by forgiveness, that allowed him to have the energy to move his legs again and to reclaim his life force. In this exchange, David saw an image of his old German friend, the soldier. And when he came to this image, he was he felt betrayed, he felt hatred and hurt. But then in this exchange, this image spoke back to him and said, "David, I was trying to keep you alive, and that's all I could find." And in this release, David got the use of his legs back. So that's what healing is all about for each of us. It's calling home our energy. It's calling home our disenfranchised pieces and parts. And it's really reclaiming ourselves. And so my aim here isn't to tell you what to do, but hopefully you can take something from that and use. Hopefully you never have to use it, but in case you do need to use it, then hopefully that's some kind of a tool. But emphasizing that forgiveness is a choice. It's a powerful act of returning to the present moment, and really a path to personal empowerment. In every moment we have a choice, and forgiveness is a conscious choice. But if you see forgiveness as letting the other person off the hook, then that's really you dipping into your own victim mentality, and you're holding the victim as more empowerment than being the witness of it. So by forgiving, you're actually reclaiming your spirit. You're reclaiming your energy, because that spirit and energy have been tied to the grievance. And that grievance ultimately becomes your lens in which you perceive and project through life. Also allows you to return to the present, and you're able to shift your own relationship with time and not being defined by past wounds, let's call them. And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or approving, harmful actions, but rather choosing to release the emotional grip of that resentment and that anger that it has on you. So, a quick little process that could be helpful. Firstly, just acknowledging the hurt. And this is essentially how I got through my little episode. It was acknowledging the hurt, recognizing the pain and the impact of the offense, and just really saying out loud how hurt I felt, and not only how hurt I felt, but how silly I felt at the same time. Then I had to make a conscious decision to let go of the anger and the bitterness and, let's say, the desire of revenge. And I remember taking this information to the police, and it took them a year to say we can't do anything. And I kind of felt all of that effort and time was worth absolutely nothing. But as I can see it from a witness viewpoint now, I can see they did their best and they were just doing their job. And even the scammers themselves, the ego part of me wanted to make all kinds of threats. And I came to a point in time where I thought, well, they're just like anyone else trying to make a buck. Not that I condone the way they do it, but that's really, for me, helped shift my perspective and what kind of space and time are they in to resort to that kind of, I guess, action. And maybe they think they're the Robin Hoods of wherever they're from, Philippines apparently. But then every villain thinks they're a hero in their own mind. They might have families to feed, and I think I fed them quite well. But then forgiving, involves shifting that perspective on the situation, and then I was able to see it from different angles, and I did my best to understand their motives. And probably the hardest part, and arguably one of the most irrational parts, was forgiving myself. Acknowledging and letting go any self-blame or guilt associated with the situation. Because in any given moment, we're doing the best we can with the information we have at hand. So my message to you regarding any person, place, or thing would simply be, let yourself off the hook. It's all just forms of love, and it's really, really, really tricky to see that in the moment while you're going through it. However, I would really encourage you to be persistent and find the space that you need in able to get there, because in the end the journey is very, very much well worth it. And to the degree you can shift your perspective and you're able to see things from a different angle, hopefully a witness and not be in the story but be of the story, then you've got a great story to tell. And so that's my story for you today. Thank you for listening. Be back next week with a really, really cool guest. So until next time, thanks for listening. See you soon.
You've been listening to The Wizard and the Priestess. Thanks for stopping by. Stay connected and be open.